In January of 2025, wildfires broke out in several areas of Los Angeles. Fueled by huge winds that persisted for days, the fires spread across tens of thousands of acres, destroying thousands of homes and claiming a still unknown number of lives. What started the fire is still a matter of speculation, but amidst one of the worst natural disasters in U.S. history runs a common thread: money. Was the fire department defunded, impacting their ability to fight the fires? Did energy companies invest in ineffective short-term solutions rather than proven long-term preventative strategies? Did insurance companies cleverly remove fire protection just in time for the fires, saving them billions? In this video, we try to sort through all of the speculation and misinformation around the LA wildfires and separate truth from fiction. There are many potential theories about what caused the wildfires, as investigators, government officials, and online sleuths bounce around different causes. In the case of the Maui fires in 2023, it took over a year for investigators to find the source, and something similar is expected in this case. One potential cause of these wildfires is power lines. Downed lines are responsible for about 10% of California's fires, but around half of their destructive fires. There are legitimate questions about whether the state has chosen the right investments around power lines to prevent fires. But state regulators have had to make difficult decisions between fire mitigation and consumer prices. The best way to prevent fires caused by power lines is to bury them. However, each mile of buried power lines costs $3 to $4 million and takes years to complete. That cost is passed on to ratepayers, in a state that already has very high energy prices. Utility companies in the states have been attempting to construct buried power lines in large numbers since at least 2007. The largest push being in the last few years, when PG&E attempted to build 2,000 miles of buried power lines after their lines had caused 2 deadly fires. But in general, the CPUC, the state's regulator, has not fully approved these requests, and instead prioritized insulated lines, which are much cheaper and faster to install and do reduce wildfire risks by 65%. In the case of PG&E, they only approved 1,300 miles of buried lines. The rest were to be insulated. In order to have prevented this particular fire, if it was caused by a power line, the state's utility companies and regulators would have had to aggressively start building buried power lines at least 5 years ago, if not longer. But the balancing act between keeping rates affordable as well as concerns that utility companies were using expensive infrastructure investments to simply make more profit have led them down a different path. Whether or not the state regrets their recent decisions to invest in certain cheaper, short-term interventions is yet to be seen, but there are a number of other factors at play. One of the biggest stories circling around these fires is the defunding of LA's fire department. The fire department chief, Kristen Crowley, has stated publicly that these budget cuts have impacted their ability to fight the fire. In May, LA adopted their fiscal budget for 2024-25, that cut the appropriations for the fire department by $17.6 million from the previous year. But that number is misleading, because later, in November, the city approved the fire department's new union contract for 2024 to 2028 that added $76 million in 2024-25 to pay for higher salaries and union benefits that were negotiated in the contract. In general, the 2024-25 budget is larger, by $58.4 million for the fire department. But that number, it turns out, is also misleading. Because in the case of the fire department's response to the wildfires, it's less about how much money and more about where the money is going. In 2023, the LA Fire Department asked for an increase of 159 personnel, as calls for service in LA have increased by 55% since 2010. Instead, they cut 61 positions. In addition, although the budget is generally higher, part of the $17.6 million in cuts was to overtime pay. That overtime pay is crucial in responses to crises like these wildfires, as firefighters are working long hours for days at a time. But there are so many factors at play in containing a fire of this magnitude. It's very difficult to know if 61 more firefighters and a few extra $1 million would have made a difference. For one, the intense winds that are fueling the fire are also causing other difficulties, such as grounding firefighting planes. Firefighters have also encountered a lack of water in about 20% of hydrants. The misinformation around LA's lack of water is perhaps the most intense. The blame has been put on Governor Gavin Newsom for not signing a Water Restoration Act that doesn't exist. It's been blamed on the Central Valley Project, which protects an endangered fish who lives in a body of water that doesn't provide any water to LA. It's been blamed on private corporations for draining LA's water supply before the fires, something that didn't happen. The fact of the matter is that LA's infrastructure was simply unprepared for a fire of this scale. All 3 of LA's water reservoirs were full before the fire, storing a collective 3 million gallons. They all ran out by 3 a.m. on Wednesday the 8th. In general, the city's infrastructure couldn't refill the tanks faster than they were being depleted. Fires were preventing access to pump stations, meaning tankers had to refill at farther pump stations to bring water back to the city. The Santa Ynez Reservoir, a 117 million gallon reservoir that helps provide water to the city, was closed for maintenance at the time of the fires. This isn't the first time this has happened. A fire back in November also saw the hydrants run dry as they couldn't be refilled fast enough. However, the lack of water may have become a convenient scapegoat. Many experts have said that no water system in the world would have been prepared for the magnitude of the fires, especially with air support often being grounded by high winds. Urban water supplies are designed to fight individual structure fires and fire suppression, not to combat a full-on wildfire. Fires of this magnitude do not often reach city centers, or at least they didn't in the past, but California's approach to new developments is sure to change that. A big part of how these fires got so bad were choices made over the past decade on where houses could be built in California. A study in 2014 estimated that by 2050, there would be 1 million new homes built in areas at very high risk of wildfires. Today, there are 2 million homes in high or very high risk areas. Building further into high or very high risk zones creates a conduit for wildfires to spread. Homes on the edge of forests ignite and spread the fire inward into parts of cities that would have been previously deemed safe. The Palisades fire began in the Palisades Highlands neighborhood, a more recent development that neighbored a state park, and spread throughout the region. In 2021, a bill was proposed that would limit developers' ability to build in high or very high risk areas. However, real estate developers aggressively lobbied against the bill. After more than a year, the bill eventually died. Real estate developers continue to push urban sprawl in LA in the name of addressing the state's housing shortages. Yet doing so often means building new luxury homes in areas that have previously been known for wildfires, rather than building urban affordable housing which doesn't turn a profit. This simultaneously does not help make houses more affordable and increases the chances of more destructive fires. Developer lobbyists also successfully pushed back against a 2021 initiative that would require certain fire-resistant building standards when developing in riskier areas. And for real estate developers, it's a win-win. They can build new developments on the outskirts, and when they inevitably burn down, they may be tasked with redeveloping the ashes. Profit after profit. There is another industry that is having the opposite experience, as intensifying wildfires in the state have made it more and more difficult to make profit. Insurance. In March, State Farm, the state's largest insurer, announced that it would not renew over 30,000 policies once they expired, including over 1,600 in the Palisades. Almost every major insurer in the state stopped writing new policies for high-valued homes in areas at risk of wildfire in 2021 or 2022. But this is nothing new. After the camp fires of 2018, the number of homeowner policies in the state that were not renewed jumped by 30%. On December 29, 2024, the state's insurance department attempted to address this problem by requiring that insurance companies cover houses in high-risk areas. In exchange, insurance companies are able to pass on the cost of reinsurance, basically insurance for insurance companies, onto customers. They are also able to set rates based on a prediction of potential risk, rather than based on historical precedent. One of the goals of this legislation was to get customers off of the state's last resort option, the FAIR plan, which offers limited coverage at very high rates. If FAIR can't meet its obligations from premiums, it spreads out the additional cost among all of the insurance companies in the state based on their market share. But FAIR is likely one bad wildfire season away from insolvency. If that's the case, the cost will be passed on to private insurers, who will then increase prices for customers across the board. And that leads to the question of what happens when this is all over. For those whose insurance was canceled or who could only find limited insurance, the idea of rebuilding is likely impossible. Between California's high cost of goods, even higher future insurance costs, and the time required to rebuild, the costs are massive. Not everyone living in the Palisades is an A-list star. Many condo and apartment buildings comprising blue-collar workers were lost in the fires as well. Developers may elect to rebuild, or they may sell the land, possibly displacing those who would intend to stay. Either way, scarcity will only make California's rental and housing prices worse, whether residents have insurance or not. Whatever the case, wildfires in California are almost certain to get worse. This is likely the most expensive and destructive series of wildfires in the state's history. And California isn't even experiencing the sort of drought conditions they did a few years ago. There are no clear infrastructure improvements that would have fully prevented this from happening, and the state continues to build new homes in high-risk areas. All of that suggests a challenging future with very few clear solutions. Will ratepayers be forced to bear the brunt of costly and lengthy infrastructure changes that will decrease the chances of fires breaking out? Will the state limit where and how new homes can be built? How much will insurance companies charge, and who will be able to pay it? We're left with more questions than answers. But as the death toll and property damage continues to climb, much more than just how to stop the fires hangs in the balance.